Okay, so this is case 20. We're discussing Big Pharma and some of their marketing techniques. My name is Malcolm. Then we have Rochelle, Madison, and Brittany along with this. So the first part I'd like to talk about is kind of a summary of everything. Big Pharma is pretty much kind of equal and synonymous with big business in today's time. It's very disliked by the public for many reasons. One of these reasons is countless numbers of lawsuits that go by, and they seem to be unscathed by it. Just like big business has over the years been plagued with unethical lawsuits and actions, Big Pharma has kind of stepped up in that area as well. Additionally, they have a lot of questionable business tactics that they go through that we will kind of go into greater detail later on. And kind of to top it all off, it feels like they're pretty much larger than government and how they operate. They generally, once again, with all the lawsuits and everything occurring, they seem to be kind of almost untouchable, and that the government has a very interesting time handling how Big Pharma goes through it. So one of the things I'd like to bring up are some of the central facts regarding this case in general. One of the main and kind of topics that would hit home was salesmanship beats science. Big Pharma is known to have a lot of research and development costs, and yet many studies kind of generally how you run the numbers, they all kind of show that Big Pharma spends more on marketing actually than research and development, which can kind of be concerning to the general population on how they're operating, because they would rather have them focus more on how the drugs are used or researched and developed rather than marketing them out to doctors and consumers. And this leads to one of their big and early kind of issues is that they market to students in med school right off the bat. They'll give them gifts, pens, notepads, some get clocks, and just a lot of materialistic items along with free lunches, and that leads to an early bias for the medical students to kind of push out how they kind of push the drugs that pharmaceutical companies have. It's kind of a scratch my back, scratch yours type of scenario after the student graduates medical school. And that kind of leads to their multiple issues with lawsuits. They've had things ranging from bribing doctors to off-brand labeling. They just are repeatedly hit with lawsuits for marketing scandals and illegal tactics of marketing. And it really doesn't phase them at all. Fines have become the cost of business for pharmaceutical companies. They actually set aside a certain amount of revenues every year because they know they're gonna have to pay fines for their actions. And that leads to another issue is the fines really aren't too bad for them comparatively. They evade a regulation very frequently, with tons of money being sent through Washington through lobbying, and they generally don't, they're generally not punished for their actions. It's not an even punishment for the damage they've done, because I'm going to go into something that's kind of outside of that is the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma. They were kind of the initial shifting point to where they went from pharmaceuticals are for trying to help the public to let's advertise this and make as much money as possible. And that's kind of what Purdue Pharma was. The Sackler family is the name behind Purdue Pharma, and they were known as the advertising champions in Big Pharma after the creation of OxyContin. Richard Sackler was one of the main family members that really was involved in the day-to-day operations, and he would boast about sales and have very interesting interpretations of having death tolls involved with OxyContin. There's a similar quote about he was being interviewed and they asked what he thought about the deaths in Kentucky. And there was about 47 deaths or 57 deaths in between there. And he said it could have been worse, and in a very demeaning tone. That's kind of the uh, foundation that his business was run on, is like everything could have been worse. And they were the starters in many people's eyes of the opioid epidemic, because they encouraged doctors to lie about the addictiveness of Oxycontin, and then uh, the overall effects of Oxycontin were lied to in marketing, from how long it would last, because they would say 12 hours when people would start feeling the effects were often 6. So the Sackler family kind of really started this, and then many bigger pharmaceutical companies followed suit, P. Pfizer and Johnson and Johnson. So now I'm going to hand this over to talk about the major issues.
Um, there's so many major issues. I am a pharmacy technician, or well, I was before I went to school, so I know even more in depth about these issues that pharmaceutical companies are just, they have a unique way of doing business. And So pricing is a huge issue. Companies such as Turing Pharmaceuticals buy a patent or a formula for a drug and mark it up to astronomical prices, regardless of the need of the seriousness of the drug, whether it's going to save people's lives or kill them if they don't get it, they don't care. Between 2006 and 2013, medication prices rose more than 6 times that of inflation. So it's not even just cost of, being in business, it's just greed. Um, the CEO of Turing Pharmaceuticals, Martin Shkreli, most people know him because he's pretty known even in social media and stuff. He became known as the bad boy of big pharma after buying a drug named Daraprim, which is often used for treatment in HIV. And he raised the price more than 5,000%. And it's a drug that people with HIV need to stay alive, stay safe, and not go into full blown AIDS. Um, Another big issue with the pharmaceutical companies is just they've been estimated to pay out over $30 billion to resolve both government allegations as well as settle criminal and civil lawsuits, including marketing practices, Medicaid overcharges, and kickbacks. And like Malcolm said, it's just they consider it a cost of business and they factor it in, and it's obviously not steep enough to make them really consider how they are doing business and how wrong it is, because it should be enough to make them have to shut down or something to where it's too steep of a price to pay. Um, Another major issue is that of companies promoting drugs for uses they're not approved for simply to make more money, using off-label uh, causes of what these drugs do. This means that people have been harmed taking drugs for something that has never actually been proven to be effective for what it's actually treating them for. Um, a notable example of this was a biotech company. Augment started marketing its anemia drug, Aransip, for uses it wasn't approved for. The judgment required them to pay $762 million. Um, and then even then, the U.S. Attorney General said Augment was pursuing profits at the expense of patient safety. And this is true of many of the big pharma companies. Pharmaceutical companies use many improper payments or bribes. They do it not even to just doctors, but pharmacies, pharmacists as well. There's a whole pharmacy week where they come in and bring us food, and it all seems very just eerie to me. But they uh, sometimes they pay doctors to prescribe their drugs, which then the doctors are receiving a kickback, which is illegal. It just makes the playing field uneven. Now, instead of a doctor only prescribing drugs that patients actually need, that is proved to treat what it is approved to treat, they're now they're getting money for or all kinds of things, vacations, all types of things to dispense these drugs. So they're just giving them to everybody instead of, who actually needs them. Ultimately, it puts patient safety at risk, while other pharmaceutical companies make even more money. Um, like I said, it's crazy. The next slide I have here is about the stakeholders. Mainly the pharmaceutical companies and their CEOs are the people with the most stake in how these companies operate. They only care about making the most amount of money. They pay lobbyists to protect their self-interests and to continue the corrupt things they do for those profits. Doctors, pharmacists, also have some stake in how these companies operate because they stand to benefit directly from them as well. If they're, taking their clocks and their pens and clipboards and everything, as well as if they're then dispensing this drug that they know may not treat the person for the thing that they're prescribing it for. They receive money, gifts, whatever, to bribe them to prescribe the drugs. The stakeholders' biggest challenges are getting away with the corruption and winning um, criminal or civil litigations they may face in regards to their business practices and lack of ethics. They use a lot of like smear campaigns to try to, like, it wasn't the pharmaceutical companies that got people addicted to opioids. No, not at all. They do whatever they can try to do to minimize their effect and maximize their profit. Um, they have the opportunity to make an insane amount of money, but they do have that risk of lawsuits, but it really should be a bigger risk to them than it is. It almost just seems kind of like they're like, well, give a dime to make a dollar, so it's totally fine, when it should be, no, we're going to take that whole dollar. Because people are greatly affected by the consequences of these practices. And that's about all I have.